This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. I'm Tony Pesta, joined by my co-host Jackson Flickinger, and today we have a very special guest, one who needs absolutely no introduction for Cavs fans. He's an enemy to some, but he's become a friend to us. Tim Bontemps, how you doing, man?
I'm doing just fine. Everybody listening should know that I hear more about the Cavs than I think just about anybody, including people who live in Northeast Ohio, because of how often I have to talk to Windhorst and how much he talks to me about the Cavs. Not just on the pod. Believe me, Cavs Corner only came out of endless discussions about the Cavs away from the pod. So
Is Brian the biggest Cavs fan, you know?
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, he likes to pretend that he's left all his allegiances behind. I jokingly call Ohio State WOSU to him. We Ohio State University, because he went to Kent State, as everybody listening probably knows. And I think it's hilarious and more than slightly embarrassing that he went to Kent State and openly roots for Ohio State instead. So his fandom in all the Cleveland teams is still pretty strong. And he's obviously got his radio show and a lot of vested interest in the Cavs. So we talk about him a lot. And also, look, like they're also a super interesting team to follow. Like they've got a lot of interesting stuff going on. They've got a ton of talent. Obviously, you know, they get Donovan back this summer, re-signed long term. So there's just a ton going on with them. And so it's made for a fun little bit on the podcast. And it's made for a lot to follow along with over the last couple of years. I don't think this year is going to be any different.
It's a much better time to be hearing about the Cavs in the Donovan Mitchell era as compared to like the Dylan Windler era or, you know, any of those other teams. This is actually a fun time to talk about.
The Dylan Windler era? Come on.
It was a thing for a brief minute.
It was not an era.
It was a thing for a brief minute. And it is funny. Like I grew up in Western New York State, like a little bit east of like probably an hour east of Erie, Pennsylvania. So I went down to Cleveland to go to the Jake to go to games when I was a kid. And obviously I've always sort of had an eye on Cleveland sports because of that. So, you know, the Cavs, a lot of people in my hometown will go down to try to see a game in Cleveland. They want to go see an NBA game. So it's a team I've had for a variety of reasons, some, you know, affiliation with for quite a while. And like I said, going back to from 2015 to 18, I spent a whole ton of days in Cleveland. And then it's, you know, I obviously covered the series last year and it's been fun to see this new group come together. And I'm really excited to see what they look like this year. It's going to be a pretty fascinating season.
Yeah, and, you know, we really appreciate you making some time for Cavs Corner. We appreciate friend of the show, Brian Windhorst. And look, we have a lot of fun stuff to discuss on this episode. Everything from Mobley's development to how Kenny Atkinson might transform the Cavs this year. But before we get to that, I have to annoy everybody by reminding them you can find the Junkyard Pod on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Follow us, give us a rating, drop a like, do it all because we really appreciate it. While we're doing the plugs real quick, subscribe on YouTube. I have other videos that I do on there. You should check it out if you like the pod. Lastly, keep up with Fear the Sword. Jackson's done a great job with the site. We're all doing some fantastic Cavs coverage on the blog, so follow that as well. And now that all the plugs are out of the way, let's get into today's episode. And I think we have to start at the most logical place, which is Evan Mobley's development. And I want to frame the discussion this way. Let's say that Tim Bontemps is in charge of Mobley's development, and you have to give him one player to watch and model his game after. Who are you picking?
That's a good question. I mean, the guy that I always sort of hoped coming into the league that he would become is Chris Bosh, right? I think Chris is one of the most talented bigs that I've ever seen play. Obviously, his career got cut a little bit short because of the blood clotting stuff. But, I mean, people forget because he was sort of the third banana on that Heat team. And so he didn't put up huge numbers. But if you go back to when Chris Bosh was playing for Toronto, I mean, he was putting up regularly 25 and 10 and, you know, could stretch the floor to three, was a super athletic guy who became, you know, an outstanding defensive player, once he matured in his career and went to Miami and really dialed in on that end of the court. And obviously he was a guy who didn't shoot a ton of threes because nobody shot a ton of threes back then. But like Kevin Garnett, he was a guy that had 3-point shooting range. And as his career went on, he became more and more of a 3-point shooter. And so he was a 4 that could play the 5 in a pinch, could play next to a big, could space the floor, could handle the ball, could pass, could do anything. And that was the guy, Chris Bosh, that you heard comparisons to Mobley when he came in the league. And so that's really, to me, sort of the overall vision of if he gets to the ultimate place that I think if you're a Cavs fan, you hope that he gets to. Like if he becomes that version of a player across the board, sort of a 5-tool 4, he's a guy who could be the best player on this team. And I think the Cavs become a team that has a championship level ceiling. If he's something short of that, and Donovan Mitchell remains the best player on the Cavs, which obviously he is right now, I just think it's going to be hard, even in a flattened talent environment that we're in now, to look at this Cavs team and see a real path to them being a regular conference finals team, a true championship caliber team. And that's the whole real discussion, right? It's like, can Evan Mobley become Cleveland's best player? Because typically, if you look at the history of the NBA, the teams that win titles when they have one of the best players in the league, the only guy, Donovan Mitchell's size, that's been that good in the past 35 years is Steph Curry. So it's hard to see that being the path, whereas there's a lot more guys who are Evan Mobley's size who've been that kind of player. So, if I had to pick one guy off the top of my head, it's a very good question. I would say Chris, for a variety of reasons. And I think if he becomes Chris Bosh in time, I think everybody in Cleveland will be very happy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You brought up Chris Bosh before when we kind of talked about this a little bit. Now that, the season hasn't started, but we've seen what Kenny Atkinson is talking about. We saw him in one preseason game. How do you feel like the fit is between what Kenny Atkinson wants and what, we hope that Mobley becomes?
I mean, it's hard to say really right now, right? Like you can go off. A lot of people say a lot of things in training camp and in preseason, and then you get to the regular season and it looks a lot different. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. So if you go to that first game the Cavs played, their pace was completely unsustainable, right? Like they could talk about playing this fast. There's no way they're going to play at the pace they played in that game. Like it'd be the fastest in the league, like league history by 4 or 5 times, I think. So they're obviously not going to play quite that fast. And some of this stuff is going to look different. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I do like the fact that they're talking about putting Evan in pick and roll actions with the ball. I think that's great. I think him handling the ball is great. Like being able to run some 4 or 5 pick and rolls with Jarrett Allen is great. All that stuff I think is really good. At the end of the day, if he doesn't become a shooter, it's very hard to envision a real scenario where he and Jarrett Allen can play together long term. And then it comes down to, what are you doing with those 2 guys? Are you trading one of those guys to try to get something better? And if you look at the current environment that the league is in, the center position is about as loaded up as any in the league. Like we talked about when I saw you guys at the live pod last month, there's a ton of good centers in the league. If you have to turn Jarrett Allen into a wing, you're probably going to be a worse team from an overall talent perspective. Right. So that's where, to me, it's like, you could say all you want about Evan Mobley handling the ball and being a passer and a hub on offense. Like all that stuff is great. He's got to become a shooter. He just has to become some kind of a threat. Not that he has to be Dirk, not that he has to be Steph Curry, but like he's got to become a guy you have to pay attention to from 3. And if that happens, a lot of things change for the Cavs. And if it doesn't, then I think we're going to be sitting here having the same conversation in a few months. And by the way, like we talk about on the pod, what's our motto? Actions over words, right? The actions of the Cavs by extending Jarrett Allen when they did, and on the number they did, would indicate that they at least think there's a possibility they're going to look at trades at the trade deadline for him. So, obviously Kenny Atkinson had him in Brooklyn. He's a huge fan of him. I'm not saying he's getting traded, but if you just look at that, the fact that they extended him, like they could have waited a day, like Larry Markkinen, they could have extended him and made sure he wasn't traded all year. And they didn't do that. So at a minimum, that door is open. And as long as Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen are both non-shooting bigs, it's a door that you're going to be looking at saying, are the Cavs going to walk through it at some point, or are they going to keep trying to make this work?
Yeah, and I have a note for that too, because one thing that we highlight on this show a lot is that the Cavs really, since the Mitchell trade, have taken a very careful, confined, like patient approach to really everything from player development to the trading block. You rarely see guys on the floor stepping out of their comfort zone. Obviously, they haven't made any big splashes since the Mitchell trade, and so I think a lot of that is the franchise was focused on. All right, how do we get Mitchell to extend? How do we convince him that this is where he wants to be? And one way you do that is win a bunch of games and not take any risks. Now that Mitchell has extended, do you think this is the time for them to start rolling the dice, whether that's, giving Mobley the ball more often or making a swing for a trade maybe at the deadline?
I mean, I think they should have been doing it the whole time because I think it's part of giving them the best chance to win. Like, to me, making Evan Mobley take 4 threes a game is not, it shouldn't be determining whether you're winning or losing on a nightly basis, right? It should just be like, Evan, you got to shoot 4 threes a game. I don't care if you go 0 for 4 for 20 games in a row, like, shoot the ball. You got to become, because again, you watch him shoot, it's not like he's Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, right? He doesn't have this awful looking jump shot. Like, he's a guy that I think should be able to develop some kind of 3-point range. If I didn't think he could do that, I wouldn't talk about it as much as I do, right? Because like I wouldn't spend any time worrying about it. Like, well, yeah, if you just can't shoot the ball, all right, then like you do have to figure out some other ways to make it better. The fact that we keep talking about it is because we could see that at least there's the possibility of that happening. So yeah, like regardless of whatever happened with Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley to me has to become their best player if they're going to become a truly championship caliber team. And the path to that is his becoming a complete 5-tool offensive player. And I know he played in Toronto and I know their team isn't very good, but you look at Scotty Barnes last year, he shot 34% on 5 attempts a game. If Evan Mobley ends this season, he's shooting 35% from 3 on 5 attempts a game, we're going to be having a lot different conversation about Evan Mobley's development, right? If he's taking a couple threes a game or one every 2 games and it sort of looks the same again, we're going to be sitting here saying, yeah, like we're 4 years into this guy's career. He hasn't done this at all. Maybe he is just a center. Maybe he isn't just going to do it. Maybe you do have to move Jarrett Allen. Like, that's why it's such an existential part to me of their future, because it really does determine everything else they have going on, because it's going to determine whether he's a 4 or a 5. And if he's a 5, then you have a real choice to make. And look, whether you think they should have negotiated or not, the Cavs just gave him a 5-year max extension. They made it very clear what they think of his long-term future. So if he's a 5 and Jarrett Allen's a 5, it sort of tells you where this is headed, especially because he was extended in a position, Jarrett Allen, to where he could be traded in February.
You brought up Scotty Barnes shooting like 5 threes a game. I believe Mobley right now is averaging 1.3 throughout his career. What is like a realistic number that you could actually see him getting to? Because we don't see guys go from shooting like 1 3 per game to shooting like 6 or 7.
I mean, I don't think he's got to shoot 7, right? But like if he gets to 4, like if he got to 4, like legitimately got to 4 attempts a game, like that would be good. Like that would be a real sign of becoming a guy you have to guard, and pay attention to, especially if he can hit any of them. But yeah, like I think if he, Scotty was, I'm just looking at it now. I mean, Scotty, his first couple of years took 2.5, then 2.9, and then last year he took 5. So yeah, like I think if Evan got to 3.5 or 4 a game, that would be real progress. Do I think that's going to happen? No, frankly, in part because I think that's part of the reason why, and I've been around the Cavs, so I can't say this for sure. I think it's part of the reason why Kenny's talking about him handling the ball and doing this other stuff a lot, right? Because like if he's not going to shoot, you need him to do this other stuff. But yeah, like I don't see why he shouldn't be able to get to 4 shots a game. Like there's plenty of room to eat on the Cavs. Like he should have all the shots he can get. It should be a focus to get him all the shots he can get. Like that, to me, it's got to be priority number 1. So that would be my hope. In the first game, he took a couple, like if I had to guess, my guess is he probably takes a couple, and that's where we're sitting in a couple months from now.
Yeah, and something that you've mentioned a few times that I also think is really interesting with this whole discussion is that Donovan Mitchell is their best player right now. And I don't know where you would put him in terms of like, is he top 10, top 15 in the NBA? But he's not a top
He's
5
somewhere in the
player.
top 20. Yeah, he's somewhere in the top 20.
And,
Like he could be
so
18th, he could be 12th. Like there's a bunch of guys in that mix. He's certainly in there. Though he's a hell of a player.
yeah, and the thing about that makes it difficult is not only is it tough to win when your best player is his size, but it's also really tough to win a championship when you don't have a top 5 player. The only time it really ever happens is like most recently with the Celtics, kind of, and then you look back and it's like maybe the 04 Pistons where you just have 4 guys who are really, really good. And I think that's what some Cavs fans have tried to like look at it that way with this Cavs team is, all right, maybe we don't have a top 5 guy, but we have 4 guys who are in the top, I don't know, 30 to 50 somewhere in the NBA. And Evan Mobley is a huge part of that because he is the guy currently who still has the highest ceiling and can get you into that top 10 range. And so it's a weird fit that they have, but you mentioned it. Like if you trade Allen and you get a wing back and he's not a better player, you're not really making the team any better. And up to this point, to tie this into Mobley's development, when he was at the 5 last year, they actually didn't get any better on offense. They actually got worse very slightly.
Yes.
But they went from 43rd percentile to 42nd. So they just haven't been able to figure that thing out at all. It would be a whole lot easier if Mobley, like we saw against the Celtics, if you put Mobley at the center and all of a sudden he looks great, these decisions become a lot easier.
Well, and
the problem is you got to see him do it consistently.
Yeah. And the only thing I want to say about that Celtics series, and this is not, I'm sure Cavs fans are going to get very mad at what I'm about to say. If you look at that game 5, the Celtics were happy to let Evan Mobley do whatever the hell he wanted.
Yeah.
Right. So like,
and I agree with that.
I'm not diminishing the performance. Like I was there. He played really well, but the Celtics were like, if we don't let them shoot threes, we can't lose the game. So we're just going to not let them shoot threes, and we'll let Evan Mobley do a bunch of short hooks in the lane, and he can score 30 points, but they can't win the math. So
and the Cavs didn't want to shoot threes anyway.
Exactly. And the Celtics don't have, like, to your point about it, Evan, the other thing about him being a center is he's just not that big. And if he's got to go up against even Karl Towns or Joel Embiid or Giannis and Brook Lopez or, you know, the guys on Orlando, like you go down these lists, you go up against Bam, right? You look at the teams just in the East, these guys are all big, physical, mauling centers. Even with, you know, like look at the Sixers, right? If they don't have Embiid playing, say Embiid is, you know, on a load management plan this year, Andre Drummond's massive. Like Evan trying to guard Andre Drummond inside or keep Andre Drummond off the glass is going to be really hard. So, like I said, it all lines up to where if he can become a star 4 and not a 5, it opens up a million possibilities for the Cavs. And if he's a good 5, even if he's a great 5, they're probably a worse team. So that's really where the balance is. It's like the higher up you can play on the positional spectrum, the better off you are, no matter who you are. And so if he can hang in there at the 4 and become a guy that's a, you know, 20 point a game, 22 point a game player who can get you some rebounds and assists and blocks and do all this stuff, like that's just a much different player. Like right now, I don't need to tell you guys this. Through his first 3 years in the league, his numbers are basically flat across the board. Like he just hasn't really changed a lot. So Kenny Atkinson's got a long track record of being a fantastic player development coach. That's, to me, the number one story their entire season is what does Evan Mobley look like in April? If he looks like a guy who's worth this max deal, then we're having one conversation about the Cavs. And if he's he's had another nice season and we're kind of having the same discussion about, well, can he become more of a shooter? Can he become more of a playmaker? Do the Cavs need to force him the ball more? You know, it's just going to tell a lot different story about what the direction of this team is.
One thing that I kind of, moving off Evan just a little bit, you mentioned, like, you know, the East, you need those big guys inside. So you would really like to keep Jarrett Allen, especially kind of on a relatively decent contract.
And by the way, their defense is awesome with those two guys. So, like, if you can have them together, you're going to have a great defense no matter what. Like, you shouldn't have a great defense with two small guards, right? In fact, they have a great defense is because I mean, JB Bickerstaff's a really good defensive coach, and they got 2 really good defensive bigs. Like that's a guaranteed formula to have a good defense. But you got to be elite at both ends. And if the offense struggles too much, then it doesn't matter.
Is there a world where even if Evan is kind of looking like the same guy on offense, you could trade Darius Garland and said, hey, we're just going to go even more in on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to get like a really switchy wing who can, just a great defender and be maybe like even better defense. Is there a world where you could see that kind of working more than like Evan Mobley at the 5 trying to, make that work?
I don't know if long term you're going to be able to get to a title with Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland together. I think that's, you have 2, like you guys have known from the beginning, right? The second you made this trade, if you're the Cavs, you have 2 small guards together and you have 2 bigs together. Like, it's a very unique thing. And if you look across the league, anytime there's been 2 small guards together, it hasn't really worked, right? The Hawks tried to do it with DeJounte Murray and Trae Young. Didn't work. You had Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum at Portland. They got to 1 semi-fluky conference finals. They had a nice team. They were never really a threat to win anything. Even Donovan Mitchell in Utah, right? They had a great team, but with him and Mike Conley, like that team never got to the conference finals. Mike Conley's a hell of a player. Donovan Mitchell's a hell of a player, right? And they had probably the best defensive player in the league at that point in Rudy Gobert. So they had a great infrastructure, everything maxed out, and they were a second round team. So ultimately you are going to have some structural flaws if that's what your team is built like. Because, it's the same thing with the 2 non-shooting bigs in recent years. You look at like Memphis with Zebo and Marc Gasol. They made 1 conference finals. Like you go down the list, it's just hard. It's hard to win with one of those archetypes, and the Cavs have both. And the other thing is, I think if you're trying to trade Darius Garland too, you're running into the same problem as Jarrett Allen. There's a lot of good point guards in the league. There's not a lot of obvious fits for him to go. And so if you're moving either one of those guys, it's going to be difficult, especially without very many draft picks, to make a trade where the talent base is better. And so that's where you have to have internal development and scheming it up and finding ways to get better both on the margins of what you have. Because the Cavs do have a lot of talent, but it's probably going to take maximizing every bit of what they have and finding some creative moves on the edges than it is to either turn Darius Garland or Jarrett Allen or anybody into the quote unquote missing piece to like make it all fall into place. I just don't think that's going to be hard to do.
So I think probably our listeners are like, why did you bring this guy on? He's being really negative about my favorite basketball team.
But here, can I say something though? Because I do want Cavs fans to hear this. I'm looking at all this stuff purely through the lens of, is the team going to be good enough to win a title or compete for one, right? That's what this whole conversation is. I don't think it's bad at all if the Cavs are the Utah Jazz with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert.
Right.
Or the Grizzlies with Zebo and Marc Gasol. Like that grit and grind Grizzlies team is one of my favorite teams of the past 20 years. I love that team. They were super fun. They had a great identity. They had an awesome, the whole grindhouse thing was an awesome thing. Like that entire team is beloved there, right? Like that, I think that's a cool outcome. Like, I don't think that's the end of the world. I'm not one of these people sitting here saying it's championship or bust, or they should nuke the team, trade Donovan Mitchell now. Like, I don't think any of that. But if we're having a conversation about, like, can the Cavs get to be a championship level team? This is the whole story, right? And maybe they can't, and that's okay. But like, I don't think that the Cavs are a failure, or that they're going to be a failure if they don't make it to 3 conference finals in a row, or Evan Mobley doesn't become an MVP candidate or whatever. But like, that's what our job is, right? Like, we spend all our time looking at these teams. Like, look at the Knicks. Everybody in New York is all fired up about the Knicks. I live in New York. I walked to the Garden on Wednesday. I would love for the Knicks to go to the finals. For me, life-wise, it'd be great. Be awesome. I could walk to work. June here, it's beautiful. The Garden's a fun place to watch games. Be great. I think the Knicks cashed in all their chips for 2 very good players. They don't have, you could argue Jalen Brunson's maybe a top 10 player. I'd say they're a little bit deeper version of what the Cavs are. Maybe that'll be good enough. It probably won't be. Is that going to, I don't think it's a failure if the Knicks don't win a title either. But, I think they probably went too quick and too soon. That's just that's all. I don't want Cavs fans to think, like I said, one of my best friends is talking to me about the Cavs all the time. I got a lot of friends who like the Cavs. I'm not sitting here rooting against the Cavs.
All I heard is that you think Evan Mobley is worse than Derek Favors. No,
Will you apologize?
Yeah, that also got taken wildly out of context.
Yeah,
as you guys know, we talked about it.
It's funny because
it's okay. I think it's funny how people talk about things, so it's all right.
I tend to be by Cavs Twitter seen as the person who's too optimistic, and then obviously people have issues with your takes and think you're too negative. But we arrived to the same conclusion, which is, hey, this is a fun Cavs team. They're not going to win a championship unless things break perfectly their way. And we should just, from a Cavs perspective, I'm just enjoying this team. I think they're fun. They're still probably in the second tier of the East. And I think, as we've been talking about, they've put themselves in a little bit of a bind with the two guards and the two bigs. Not sure if the right trade is out there. Their only way through is getting kind of that home run of Evan Mobley develops into what you need him to be. Yeah. So that's where they've put all their chips.
And I think they're a fascinating, real quick. I just think they're a fascinating basketball experiment, right? They're a super interesting team. I really like watching them because they are so much different than what everybody else is doing. I really like when we see teams doing things that aren't the same as everybody else. Do I think the Kings are going to be some great team this year? No. But having De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis and DeMar DeRozan all together, I'm really interested to see what that looks like. That's going to be a fun thing to look at. Do it like I just said before. Am I confident that the Knicks going all in on Cat and Mikal Bridges is going to get them where they want to go? No. But they're going to be a fascinating experiment to see, can Cat play center? Can these guys stay healthy? What are they going to do? Can a Tom Thibodeau team lead the league in offense and have issues at the other end, right? So, that's the part of this stuff that's fun. And I think if you're a Cavs fan, they're a super fun team. Donovan is the second best player to probably ever play for the team. He just signed up long-term. You got a young big with a ton of potential. You got a lot of interesting things that can go on. It's a super fun team. But, if we're looking at, like you said, if we're looking at it in the context of where do they sit in the East, how do they get from 4, 5, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or whatever they are to 1 or 2, well, it comes down to, can Evan Mobley take a leap? I mean, he's one of the most interesting players in the league this year, I think, for that very reason. And it's why we talk about him a lot. And it's why, it's why all three of us on the pod were focused in on what he was doing in that game the other day. It's if you list probably the 5 most important players in the East in terms of guys who are going to impact how things play out, he's probably in the top 5. It's just a super interesting and important guy.
One of the things that I think is interesting, I know the GM survey is mostly BS, but one of the things that I think was interesting is that the only team to pick to win the East besides the Celtics was the Cavs. But then you look at second place, it's only I think two GMs picked them for second place, whereas Philadelphia and New York were basically split 50-50. Can you make an argument that the Cavs have a higher ceiling than any of those other teams in the East and maybe a lower floor? Or is that just one GM just out of their mind?
So it's funny. I had to write a story on that the other day. I'm trying to pull up the survey here. Where is this thing? Because I didn't see that there. There's a reason why I'm doing this, so I apologize for the. Okay, yeah. So that's funny. So you guys realize what that means, right? The way that went, the 97-3.
We were thinking it was Boston.
Well, yes, you're not allowed
to
pick
themselves.
Yeah, you're not allowed to vote for yourself.
So Boston picked that.
The Celtics, so the Celtics, whoever did it in the front office, whether it was Brad Stevens or an intern or somebody, said the Cavs are going to have the best record in the East this year. Yeah. Which is interesting. That's an interesting thing. And look, I could make an argument that the Cavs could have the best record in the East this year because Philadelphia is going to be 100% focused on having Joel Embiid and Paul George healthy in April. That's their goal. Like, they're not going to play those guys 80 games. Not going to play probably close to 80 games. The Knicks, OG Anunoby and Karl Towns, massive injury questions. The Knicks have 6 true rotation players right now, right? They got massive questions after that. If they have any injuries, they're going to struggle. The Celtics don't have Kristaps Porzingis playing until at least December, might be January. They have any injuries, they could struggle a little bit, right? You've got Indiana. I didn't really like their summer. I thought they were a little overrated last year. I'm curious to see what they look like. Can Tyrese Halliburton look right, or is he going to still look hobbled like he has since January? Let's see what Orlando looks like. Let's see what Miami looks like. But like, if you told me that the Cavs, all these guys are young, relatively healthy. Obviously, Darius has had some wacko freak injuries, like what happened to him last year, right? If those 4 guys are healthy and durable and play a lot, like, yeah, if you told me the Cavs won 55 games, like, I could see that. I could see them finishing first or second in the East. Now, if they get in a playoff series and you go player for player, like, I think Philly's clearly better. I think some of these, I think Milwaukee, if they're healthy, is better. I think the Knicks are probably better from a talent perspective. But I would say the Cavs have a pretty high floor because they're young. And even though Donovan had the knee stuff last year, they're pretty durable. And their ceiling is up in the air because, again, if we're talking about Evan Mobley as an all-star in February, but okay, maybe the Cavs are the Pacers next year. Maybe they're making a run to the conference finals. Or they, these other teams are healthy. The Cavs are 4th or 5th. They play the Sixers in the first round. The Sixers are healthy and they lose in 5 or 6 games. Like, I could see any one of those scenarios. Like, the top 8 in the East, for all the talk about the West, the top 8 in the East is really good. And like, if those teams are all healthy, it's going to be a nightly bloodbath. So I do think the Cavs, if you're just betting on the curve of what is this going to look like, if you're simulated out 1,000 times, I think more often than not, the Cavs are going to finish pretty high in the regular season because their floor as a young, healthy team with pretty high talent upside should get them to win a lot of games.
I do just want to say that I am very skeptical of the Sixers, and I just want to get that on record that I think the Sixers are going to kind of have a Milwaukee Bucks-like season. So.
I wouldn't say that. I would say I would be skeptical of the Sixers from a health standpoint. If the Sixers are injured, then they're obviously not going to win. I was just around them for the last week. They're in a great place. Their team is loaded with talent. I think those 3 guys are the best big 3 in the league, pretty clearly. They fit together perfectly. I think Tyrese Maxey is going to have an absolutely monster season for them. Like, I'm really high on their talent level and their fit. But again, I have no idea if Joel Embiid could get through the season healthy. I frankly have no idea if Paul George can get through the season healthy. Like, that hasn't been talked about very much either. Paul George last year played 74 games. The prior 4 years with the Clippers, he didn't play in more than 56. Now, some of those years were a little bit depressed by games played, but still, I mean, he missed a lot of games. So, yeah, like that, they have, to me, more variance than any team in the NBA. Because you could tell me they could win 43 games or they could win close to 60. And, like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. Whereas I think the Cavs are going to be like 50 to 55. Like, I just think the Cavs should be a lot narrower band in terms of what they're going to be because their floor is really high. Like, with all these injury questions on these other teams, I'll be pretty surprised if the Cavs aren't hosting a first-round playoff series.
I'm just really skeptical as to – it feels like we've put people next to Embiid that should work better in theory than they actually end up doing. And I'm kind of at the point where, like, even though Paul George should fit really well, I just need to see it. So I don't want to get derailed too much into a Sixers conversation. Just want to point out that I'm skeptical.
I get it. To me, the only questions about them should be from an injury standpoint because I think their fit across the board is really good. And I think they had as good of a summer as they could have had. Like, I understand the general skepticism because they haven't broken through in the playoffs, but like they had an A++ summer. So now it's a matter of can they do it on the court and can they stay healthy? And like, I think it's going to be the Kawhi plan from 2019 with Toronto.
Yeah.
And, that team was 17-5 in the games Kawhi didn't play and won 58 games. I think the East is a lot harder than it was then. But if you told me that the Sixers win the low to mid 50s and those guys play 60 games and are ready to go in April, I'm going to like their chance of making a deep run.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I'm going to go ahead and bring us back to Cavs Corner real quick to hit on really one more topic, and then I have a couple very quick rapid-fire questions to get to. But since we're talking about what teams did over the summer, Cavs, they didn't really make any big moves. It's basically the same roster. They did, however, clean out shop and hire almost an entirely new coaching staff. Now, oftentimes, firing the coach can just be kind of a cover up for some bigger issues on the roster that I think we've talked about already and we've kind of highlighted. I know a lot of Cavs fans, myself included, are kind of talking ourselves up that Kenny will, completely change everything. But in the case of the Cavs, I do think you can make a genuine argument that the right coach and developmental approach could unlock this team in a way that JB wasn't able to. Again, JB, I think he's a solid coach, great defensive coach, limited offensively. So my question is, they're bringing in Atkinson to solve all of this. And really, I just want to get realistic expectations. How much of a difference could a coach actually make in this case?
I mean, it just comes down to whether he could develop Evan Mobley, I think. I don't really buy a lot of the talk about how, disjointed their offense was and stuff. This team was really good. They had a really good season. They had a flawed roster. They still have a flawed roster. But if Kenny can get more out of Darius Garland and more out of Evan Mobley, that's what it comes down to. I mean, that's a guy who, with his track record, is hired to have those guys play better, develop, shoot more threes, just get better as players, make the pieces fit better. So, it's either going to happen or it's not. And I don't know how it's going to go, but that's where I come back to the floor for this team. The floor is high. If they're just what they were last year, they're a very good team. So it's hard for me to see it getting worse. Barring injury, I don't think they can go backwards. So then it's okay, well, how much of a step can they take? And, I don't think they're going to be the Steve Kerr taking over the Warriors effect. But that's obviously the ultimate example, or one of them, of this. But, if you look at what Joe Mazzulla has done with the Celtics, he's really leaned into the math. And Ime Udoka is a very good coach, but Joe has really leaned into the math, and it's sort of maximized what that team can be. And so if the Cavs lean into the math, particularly on offense, maybe it does make them a few wins better. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think Kenny's going to necessarily reinvent the wheel. I don't think he's been trying to, but I think it's much more about those two things. Can Darius Garland get back on track after an up and down year for him? And can Evan Mobley take a big step forward? I think that's going to determine the success, or failure is probably strong, but I think that's going to determine, to your point, just how big of an impact the Kenny Atkinson hire will have. It's either going to be maybe not rearranging the deck chairs, but just not that relevant to the overall landscape for the Cavs, or it'll make a real difference because those guys will look a lot better a year from now, and we'll be talking about them in a much different way.
Yeah, so on the Kenny Atkinson point, I do have a stat that I want to share, and just,
All
one
right.
area where
We
maybe
like
he could make
stats.
a difference. Over the last two seasons, the Cavs, when they're playing against teams that are below 500, they've gone 57-12. So they've just absolutely crushed those teams. But when they play against the better teams at 500 or above, they're 41-53. So they've struggled against the top of the league. Now, there are a lot of factors and reasons for that, but one thing to highlight when it comes to coaching is that it did often feel like, and I know sometimes fans just blame the coach instinctively, but it did feel like oftentimes they were being out-coached. They would, come out of halftime and there would be an adjustment made by the opposing coach and the Cavs couldn't figure it out. And so I'm hopeful that maybe Kenny could be a guy who will fix that, get them in a better position to compete and be more willing to adjust on the fly, because under the previous staff, they seemed very stubborn. The Knicks series will stand out in my head forever, because not only were they just getting pummeled for a lot of different reasons, but the game plan basically stayed the same each time. It was just the same thing over and over again. It's very frustrating to watch. So I hope that Kenny will be a little more willing to adjust and experiment.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say, Tony, is I think if you look at the general record for teams playing over 500 and under 500 teams.
Yeah.
It's going to kind of look like that, right? Like generally, if you're playing really good teams, you're probably going to win around half the time. And then if you beat up on the bad teams, that's what separates really good teams from pretty good teams, because you take care of business against who you shouldn't. So I don't necessarily think that's a criticism. I guess I wouldn't say it's a valid criticism, because like I said, I think I understand some of the frustrations with JB Bickerstaff. I would also just again point out this is a team with a flawed roster. And I think you could say he could have done things differently. Not even saying he should have kept his job. But if the Cavs have made a bet that the coach is going to make a big difference. Unless the coach makes the players play differently, I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference. And that comes down to what we've talked about, getting more out of Darius Garland, getting more out of Evan Mobley. Like, I don't think a stylistic change, I don't think the Cavs playing faster is going to make them a 60-win team, right? It's like he's got to get more out of those guys. And I would say the biggest failing, if there was one, of JB's tenure was that Evan Mobley is basically the same player offensively he was when he came in the league. And that was not really been talked about at all. And I think that's a much bigger systemic problem for the Cavs than, well, this team didn't move the ball enough, or they didn't shoot enough threes, or like whatever you want to say, right? And that's where, if Kenny Atkinson can follow through with the kind of impact he's capable of, that could be a pretty significant change. But, right now it's October 11th. That's sort of the beauty of preseason. You could say sort of anything about what it's going to look like. And, we'll have a much better sense in 3 months. We're sitting here mid-January. We're halfway through the season, and Evan Mobley's taking 2 threes a game and is averaging 16 points a game. We're going to be going, all right, like, this is a little disappointing. Where if he is taking 3 or 4 and he's handling the ball and doing all the stuff, I'm like, oh, great. This guy's taking real steps. This is exciting. And, we'll see if he can keep it going in the second half.
And I like that you brought up the biggest failure that JB had was kind of letting Evan just kind of stay himself on the offensive side. And we've seen that with like Darius Garland, with Isaac Okoro. So this is a problem that has continued with guys that the Cavs have brought up through their system, even to a smaller extent, like Dean Wade. They've been talking about, oh, Dean Wade, you need to shoot more threes. You need to get more involved offensively. And it's like, this is year 4 or 5.
Dean Wade's biggest problem is he can't get on the court. I mean, every time he plays, he's
stay on the court.
I mean, that's what I mean. By get on the court, yes, you're right. Stay on the court. But yeah, look, I mean, player development's hard too, right? Like, it's one of the things I'm most fascinated about in the whole league. It's really hard to consistently develop players. Otherwise, everybody would do it. Like, you look at Toronto, they had a stretch where they were developing guys left and right. And then they've had a several-year stretch where they haven't. And now, Scotty Barnes is looking great. And they've got some other young guys, and like, they're maybe starting to do it again. But like, it's a really hard thing to do. I'm not sitting here saying like I've got a crystal ball and I know exactly how to do it. But I do think that when fans talk about coaching stuff, right? Oftentimes it's use of your players and development of your own players. That's going to have a much bigger impact on the overall landscape and how well you're doing than changing a scheme. Like, it's not really about schemes. It's about, can you maximize what you have? And again, like I said, the Cavs, I would have negotiated with Evan Mobley. I wouldn't have given him a full max in the summer, but they did. They clearly believe he's going to be a franchise cornerstone player and a guy that's going to be a perennial all-star caliber player, right? Kenny Atkinson's job is to make him that kind of player. So if he can do that, that's going to show that that was a wise decision, and he's going to earn his money.
One of the things I want to say on that point, the Cavs are trying something very different. They're doing like a constraints-led approach with their player development guy. They brought in somebody who's outside the NBA and trying to do different things. I wrote about it on Fear the Sword, so if you're interested in that, check that out. But we'll see how that goes, but at least they are trying something different. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and that's what we wanted from the coach, is just to try some things, because to wrap up this whole discussion and move into our final little rapid fire segment, I think we all agree the end of the day, it all comes down to that internal development, that internal growth, regardless of the roster construction or who's in charge. At the end of the day, Evan Mobley, and it's not just him, Darius needs to grow. Everyone across the roster needs to grow if you're going to be a championship contender, but it really all settles down to Evan Mobley is going to be the guy who determines the Cavs ceiling, and you got to find a way to get the most out of him. That includes his own, that includes him just as much as it includes the external factors. So moving into our rapid fire segment so we can get Tim out of here. Again, we appreciate you taking the time to do this for us.
Awesome, man. I'm excited to do it. I'm sorry it took me a little bit to get back to you guys. There's been a lot going on my end. So excited to do it. So yeah, what do you got? Let's hear these rapid fire questions. You've been hyping them up since before we started. So I'm excited to see what they are.
You have been.
All right. Well, we kind of already answered like most of them, so maybe I shouldn't have hyped them up. But I just wanted to give him an opportunity to go ISO and rattle off a couple takes.
Yeah, let's do it.
In the annual NBA GM survey, Donovan Mitchell didn't get a vote for best shooting guard in the league. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm not surprised only because it's kind of a binary thing, right? And you look at the way Anthony Edwards played in the playoffs. And, I would say that it's not shocking to me. I also think Donovan Mitchell is he's probably, Anthony Edwards, I would say, is first on that list. And then Donovan Mitchell's second or third, probably with Devin Booker, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, that's one of those things where if you're a fan of the team, I'm sure you're going, what the hell? Why isn't Donovan getting any respect? He's one of the three best shooting guards in the league, and he's awesome. So I'm glad he re-signed with the Cavs.
Yeah, the bigger issue with that survey is the fact that no one knows what position anyone plays because Luka's in like 4 different categories.
Yeah, it would be nice. As someone who obviously does a survey every year, I can empathize with doing it because it's a lot of work to just get all that stuff in. It would be nice if it was like Luka was in a position, or like whatever. LeBron was in a position
from these players.
Pick one of these 25 guys as the best player or whatever. Because then you would have a little bit less of this like Luka in 4 position stuff or whatever. But yeah, it's hard. I empathize with anybody trying to get together 30 people trying to do stuff because it's like herding cats and you just want to get it over with. I know that from the MVP straw poll myself for sure.
Yeah, I didn't know that the survey was 50 questions too. That's a lot. So
yeah, that's the thing. You're asking obviously it's NBA.com, so it's through the league, but still, like you're asking people
it's a lot to do there.
Yeah, it's a lot. You have somebody expending a good amount of time to do it, so you also
they're gonna make some mistakes too. Because every once in a while you get the
and if you just
random
leave
vote,
it like,
you're like,
hey,
how'd you
name
land
the best,
on that?
Right. If you just like say name your best guys across the positions, which is I think a fair way to do it, you are going to have some people say LeBron's a power forward or a small forward or a point guard. And like you're inevitably just going to have it might be better at this point to just say who are the 5 best players in the league. But they've done the survey this way for so long, I understand why they keep doing it this way.
What is your hottest I was going to throw in some rapid fire questions here.
It's not.
This is part of my pod too.
Don't hog the mic, buddy. Come on. I'm an open book, guys. What do you got?
All right. What's your hottest negative Cavs take right now?
Ooh.
What's my hottest negative Cavs take? I don't know if I really have one other than that. I need Evan Mobley to show me he can do this stuff, I guess. I think Jarrett Allen is I always think, I guess here's what I'll say. I've always thought his defensive stuff was a little overrated. I think he's a really good defensive player, but Jarrett Allen's an awesome defensive player also. And it's kind of and I don't mean that he's bad or shouldn't be recognized as a really good player or anything, but you kind of need both of them there to maximize each other. So I guess maybe that, but I'm talking a ton about Evan Mobley. I find he's just such an interesting player. And there's just very few guys in the league with the kind of ability to change the fortunes of their teams by themselves like he has. So yeah, I guess the hottest one overall is just I would love in April to be talking about him as the most improved player in the league. And let's see him have a monster season. Yeah, right. Like, let's see him have a monster season and become a 20-10 guy and show some ability to shoot the ball and like really take a huge step. Like, that'd be awesome. So, but yeah, the Cavs are really good. That's that's the funny thing about, I guess, my general, the way my position on them is perceived. Like, I guess they don't have a traditional three. Like, in a perfect world, you'd have more of a bigger, better defensive three than Max Strus, or you'd have Max at the 2 and somebody like that at the 3 and one of the small guards, right? But like, I don't know. I'm just like reaching for something there. Like, they got a really good, deep team, and I'm excited to see how they play.
I can give you an easy negative take, maybe. What's your take on George Niang?
Oh, my man, the minivan? Oh, come on. I love the minivan. He's the best.
Cavs fans do not love minivan.
I know. I think George is one of those guys that when you watch him, it's easy to like sort of miss the things that he does well. And he's a perfect example of, he's not an incredible shooter, but he's a good enough shooter that everybody, when he's on the court, is going to go, I got to make sure I'm guarding George. Right now, he's also a career 40% 3-point shooter. But like last year, he had 5 attempts a game or just under at 37.5%. Like, that's fine, right? It's not otherworldly. I think Isaac Okoro was probably in a similar ballpark, I think, on a couple attempts a game. The difference is people let Isaac Okoro shoot every day.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas
we
Niang,
go over this all the time.
Right. That's the thing. Like, when Andre Roberson played for the Thunder back in the days, like the initial archetype of this guy, right? Thunder fans or the Thunder themselves could say, hey, Andre's a 35% 3-point shooter. That's fine. He takes 2 a game. It doesn't matter. Right. If he takes 2 threes a game, let's say he makes both of them. If you don't guard him the whole game and he makes 2 threes, the rest of the game you're playing 4-on-5. It's probably a win for the defense. So George, being a guy who's a gunner, who teams respect, and is a better defender than he looks, and can space the floor, doesn't need the ball, good locker room guy. Like, he's the kind of guy on a cheap number that there's a reason he was on the Jazz and then the Sixers and now the Cavs, and they've all been good. Like, he's just the kind of guy that helps you win games, and he might have some limitations that make it hard to play in the conference finals or the finals, but that goes for 99.9% of all NBA players. So,
can you tell Tony that Craig Porter Jr. sucks?
Listen, it's been some rough months for him, but he had a great preseason game yesterday, Jackson. He looked good.
I think Craig Porter Jr.
I was there.
Craig Porter Jr. is a good success story for last year for the Cavs. He's an interesting young player, and like, again, that was a sign. Like, we were talking about developmental failures is strong, right? But like developmental issues, like Craig Porter becoming a useful NBA player last year, that's a big win. If you have a guy who's on a 2-way who becomes a quality NBA player, even if he's your 10th guy, like, that's a really significant win for an organization. It's not a small thing. You look at the Celtics, right? They get Sam Hauser on a 2-way. Sam Hauser has become one of the best 3-point shooters in the league, is on a fantastic contract going forward. Awesome player, right? Like, that's the whole point of your back half of your roster if you're a good team, especially a team like the Cavs. It doesn't have a lot of draft picks, doesn't have a lot of stuff. You got to develop young players. You got to find guys on the margins who can step in. Sam Merrill, too, another guy who's bounced around, was on the scrap heap.
Jackson
probably should have played more. But, like, that's right. But, like, again, found money on the back of your roster, that's the way to remain an elite team and the way to keep turning over players over time. I mean, look at Miami, right? For years and years and years. Look at Max Strus. He went from a 2-way guy to a starter to a guy who played in the finals to a guy that left to get a big deal. They put Haywood Highsmith right behind him. Same with Duncan Robinson. Same with, a lot of these guys. Like, they've done that over and over and over again. So, I firmly disagree with Craig Porter is not good. I think Craig Porter is a nice player, and I think it's a very good win for the Cavs, I think.
I just want to say
a lot of Cavs fans by being a Craig Porter fan. A lot of Cavs fans are going to come around on that.
I'm very fair.
It's more so the way Tony talks about him, because Tony talks about him like
without sidetracking it too much. I just think he's going to be a good third string point guard, which is good for an undrafted guy. Sometimes I get a little carried away, but what fun is Twitter if I can't get carried away?
That's exactly right. That's what Twitter is for, to get carried away.
I have one last question, Jackson. You can always add something if you want, but this is the last one that I think would just be something fun to ask. It doesn't have to be Cavs related. Since you give takes for a living, what's the worst take you've ever had? Do you have one that you look back on and regret?
I mean, I don't give takes for a living. I report on the league and have opinions.
Okay, yeah.
No, the worst one I had for sure, and I can remember it immediately, was I thought the Wolves were going to win 50 games the first year Tom was there, first or second year. The year before Jimmy got there. I thought they were going to be awesome.
Oh.
I thought they were on the ascendancy.
The Wiggins era.
Yeah, like Tibbs a great coach. Yeah, Tibbs a great coach. I thought Cat was becoming a star. I was a fan of Wiggins. Like, they had Levine. They got all these young guys with talent. I liked where they were headed. I was very optimistic about their future. And then the doors fell off. And then they ended up trading for Jimmy a year later, and they took off. But that first year with Tibbs was rough, and I thought they were going to be awesome. So, I mean, that's the one that I can immediately think of off the top of my head. But yeah, like fans get upset from a lot of teams, but all I do is I do reporting, and I analyze, and I give an honest assessment. And sometimes I'd say oftentimes my hit record's pretty good. Other times it's not so great. That Wolves one, that was an immediate black eye. Because like a month into the season, I was like, "Yeah, these guys aren't winning 40 games, let alone 50 games." I'm going to look up their record now. I want to say they were like 32-50 that year. It wasn't great. It wasn't a great call. Let's see. Minnesota that year was
long enough. You're going to have some misses, so it's understandable.
Exactly. Yeah, that year they were 31-51, which is just a super. It's a super call to be like, these guys are going to be awesome. They're not going to make the playoffs. That's great.
Yeah, that we've all been there before, so I can't knock you too much. And listen, it's not just Cavs fans. Every fan base gets sensitive, so we've all been there. I've had Raptors fans, 76ers fans who hate me for saying something about Embiid. If I post a video of Embiid flopping, I'll have 200 Sixers fans attacking me. So we all understand how it is. But
everybody should just be off Twitter more anyway. So that would be better for everybody, I think.
I agree with that. That's something I need to take that advice myself.
Yeah, I'm gonna say you definitely don't take that advice, but that's fine.
Well, yeah. Listen, I can know that something's bad for me and still do it. It's toxic, but I'm addicted to Twitter. What can I say?
Last thing, will you apologize for the Derek Favors comment? Just yes or no?
No, because I'm going to explain for people who just didn't
hear
what happened.
You said it. End it, Tony.
I'm on a podcast with my buddy Zach Lowe, who should be working now and hopefully will be soon, and Bobby Marks, who I covered when I started my career with the Brooklyn Nets. Covered the team when they moved to Brooklyn. Known Bobby forever. Very good, close friend of mine. And we were talking about Evan Mobley. I want to say it was the beginning of last season. And I brought up Derek Favors, who Bobby drafted and then traded for a star. And I brought him up in the context of this is a super intriguing, raw, young player that they drafted third overall, just like Derek Favors, who over time, like, there's sort of a choice at some point. Do you believe this guy's going to become a franchise cornerstone player, or do you use him to turn him into a franchise cornerstone player? The Nets obviously chose that path. The Cavs obviously chose a different path, but I wasn't saying he was Derek Favors. I will also point out the other part of the comparison that I do also agree with is Derek Favors went to Utah, was part of really good defensive teams there, playing next to another big who didn't shoot. And the talk for years was Derek Favors going to shoot threes, and he shot like 2 corner threes a game, and that was it. So I don't think Evan Mobley's Derek Favors. I don't think his career is going to be over at 30 like Derek Favors, whose body fell apart and he became a center, like full center over time. But I do think that, like, if you're talking about the overall ceiling of Evan Mobley, if we're talking about him as a non-shooter 2 years from now, I just don't see how he's one of the 25 best players in the league. And if we're talking about him as a guy who's taking 4 or 5 threes a game, I think there's a world where he's a top 10 player in the league. So, like, that's the whole story of the Cavs season and the next couple seasons is how good is he going to be? And I'm very excited to do my twice weekly Cavs Corner updates on the pod and to see where it goes and to follow along, because I can guarantee my man Window will be following along, and I know you guys will be too. And I think the Cavs are going to have a fun and super interesting year. I'm excited to watch it.
You heard it here first. Tim Bontemps doubles down on the Junkyard Pod. That's going to do it for this episode. Tim, thank you once again for taking the time to chat with us. I think this was a really great discussion, and we agree on a lot more than we disagree on. I know there's the perceptions and everything, but you really do have some pretty solid Cavs takes. I'm glad we were able to connect for this.
No, it's awesome. It was great to meet you guys at the podcast, and Brian has been a fan of your guys for a long time, and for a long time. So like, man, these guys do a really good job on the pod. Got to pay attention to their stuff, which I have paid attention to. You guys do a good job. I've enjoyed all the jokes at my expense. So I have a very thick skin and I'm not offended. And I'm glad we got to do this finally. I'm sorry it took me a couple extra weeks, and I'm looking forward to doing it again during the season, because it's going to be a super fun Cavs season and there's going to be a lot to talk about.
Awesome.
We will definitely hold you to that.
Enough. Yeah,
please do. Be great.
When Evan Mobley has a breakout game, we're going to have you on immediately.
Can have me on
Or
with
Craig
Windows
Porter
sometime.
breakout.
We could just do a full Cavs Corner transplant. It'd be great.
Yeah, man, that'd be awesome. Like I said at the top, you can find the Junkyard Pod on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube and you want to follow those platforms, then please use the links in the description. It'll take you straight to us. Go ahead and subscribe, drop a like, leave a comment. That stuff really does help us out. And with all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs.